What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be automotive photography Lightroom basics. I don't know about you guys, but when getting into automotive photography and trying to find editing videos, a lot of them were all over the place whenever trying to learn about Lightroom. It was always about portraits or landscapes, none of it really ever related to automotive photography. So that is what today's all about. Now, this is the basics, so I'm not going to be going into too much detail. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. I will continue this series if it gets good feedback, and I'll go into more advanced techniques and the different tools, and then we could also hop into Photoshop down the road. But nonetheless, let's hop right into this. So the first thing you're going to see here is the image itself. Now, what I tend to do, so for portraits or portrait style, meaning it's a taller image, I will crop this 4:5 for Instagram. 4:5, the aspect ratio is the largest that Instagram accepts. Having a portrait style photo means it takes up more real estate, and odds are more people are going to see it as they're scrolling through their feed. So I tend to do that quite often, but please feel free to crop that to whatever you like and whatever makes the best composition. Moving on, we have temperature. So temperature is pretty easy to understand. The lower the number is, the cooler it gets, or the more blue it has, and the higher the number, the warmer it gets, and the more yellowish orange it tends to look. So the best way to understand this is simply to go back and forth with the slider and see what looks the best. So for example, I think right around 51, 62 looks very, very good. Now moving down, we have tint. Same concept. All the way to the left is going to be green, all the way to the right is going to be magenta, and you're going to want to just slide this around until you find a happy medium. For me, I think 13 looks good. Next up, we have exposure. Exposure will either brighten the entire image or darken the entire image. It does not focus on any select properties. It's just the entire image as its own. Next up, we have contrast. So contrast will darken the darks and brighten the brights, or make the blacks blacker and the whites whiter, making it more punchy feeling. So I tend not to use too much of that. Highlights will target the brightest areas or the brightest whites, and it will adjust those. So for cars, a lot of times this will mess with the headlights, fog lights, sometimes the windshield, anything that's white or has like a reflector, and then also the sky. Most times, depending on how you expose the image, you're going to want to bring down the highlights because it recovers a lot of the information in the skies. Shadows. This will lift some of the darker blacks and try to bring out more detail. This is usually huge when it comes to the grille, the wheels, anything that's kind of dark. It also does work on the windshield and windows. It will show more of the interior. One thing to be aware is when you're adjusting this as a whole, it also will adjust the background. So if there's trees or anything else in the background, it will make those shadows rise as well. Whites. With whites, the higher the value, the brighter the whites are going to be. Lower the value, the darker it's going to be. Now, one thing to keep in mind is depending on the color of the car, for example, this is a brighter shade of red. It does make a big difference on the luminance of the paint. So keep that in mind. You want to try to find a happy balance between how it looks on the car and also the sky. Same thing goes for the blacks. This will just make the blacks a little bit darker, whereas if we raise this, it makes them a little bit more dull and it brings out more detail. Personal preference, you can use whatever you like. Now let's compare before and after with just using these two right here. As you can see, we've made a big difference and we barely touched on anything, and this is already looking mighty fine if I do say so. So moving down here, we have texture. Texture, it just adds a little bit more information in the details. It'll try to make it a little bit more crispy. I tend to use this with an adjustment brush, which I will show you guys in another video that's a little bit more complex. You don't have to use that too much, but if you want, just add a little bit, like maybe 10 or 20. Clarity, same thing. It kind of darkens the darks. It just makes the image a little bit more punchy. It's kind of similar to contrast, but a lot of people, they'll go way over the top and it looks kind of funky. It almost looks like an Instagram filter. So be sure to use that in moderation. I, at most, will use about 15. It just adds a hint of pop to the image. Dehaze, if we go all the way to the left, as you can see, it looks like Casper the Ghost just socked you in the head. If we go all the way to the right, it looks like Picasso threw up. So pretty much what this is doing is it is just amplifying. I believe this is adjusting the saturation and the contrast. So you really want to use this in moderation. I don't use dehaze too much unless it is overexposed, meaning the image is too bright, and this will bring back some of the detail, but it does mess with the colors as well, so you have to be wary of that. Now, vibrance versus saturation, I tend to use Vibrance. I don't know the specifics on the differences between the two. In my opinion, and what I see is that Vibrance really focuses on just some of the brighter colors in the image, where Saturation is all the colors in the image. So I tend just to mess with the Vibrance because I will go back in and change anything I need to in the next slider. But feel free to use either one of those. Now the tone curve, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible to understand. What this is doing is it's your histogram. So all the way up here on the right, this is your brightest of whites. All the way down here on the left is the darkest of darks. And each one of these dots is something different. So for example, brightest of brights, this is brighter than normal, but not the brightest of brights. Midtones, which is kind of the neutral middle, and then you have dark and then pitch black. So what most people tend to do is an S curve, which is going to look something kind of like this. Now again, this is going to come down to a lot of practice. You just have to play around and see what works for you and kind of the style you're going for. Now you're going to notice when we did that, now the image looks a little bit darker. So what we'll do is we'll raise the blacks here. We're going to bring up the shadows, and we're going to drop the highlights just a tad, and that's looking mighty fine. So again, here's a before and after, and you can see just add a little bit more depth to the image. There's a lot more detailed videos on YouTube describing this, and it goes a lot more in depth. But again, this video, I just want to kind of skim the surface. That way you have an understanding. The best way to get more knowledge on this is honestly just to practice, but hopefully it gets you going in the right direction. Next up, we have your Hsl tab. So this one, it took me a long time to ever mess with, but it's a very powerful tool. So you're going to have Hsl, which stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue will actually change the color of whatever one you're on. So for example, right now we're on red. So this will adjust the reds to either more of like a pink or more of an orange. Next up, we have saturation. This is just going to change how strong the saturation is or how bold the color is. If you go all the way to the left, it's going to just remove it. If you go all the way to the right, it's going to kind of amplify and increase the saturation, making it pop more. Luminance is just how bright or how dark. So if we go all the way up here, you can see now it's very bright. If we go all the way down to the left, it is very dark. There's no right or wrong to these. It all is going to come down to practice depending on the lighting. So you're going to want to go through here and just mess with each one. So for example, if the background here, it's kind of an orangish color. If we want to get rid of that, we can just turn down the saturation just on the oranges, and now that is looking good. So lots of custom tailoring. We could change this more to an orangey, or we can make this more of a yellow. Lots of different things to play around with. Now, color grading, this one was extremely difficult. So again, I'm going to try to make this very, very easy to understand. What this is doing is, for example, see we have highlights, shadows, and midtones. So with this color wheel, as you adjust this, you can see right down here, see how it's purple, now it's blue, teal, green. This is adding that color to those areas of the image. So for the highlights, everything that's bright, it is adding this color, and the farther we go out, the stronger that color is. So for highlights, a lot of people typically will go with kind of an orangish yellow hue. So for that, like kind of over in this area right here. For shadows, I tend to use kind of blue, but again, there's no right or wrong. You use whatever you like that makes the image look the way you want it to look. So that right there looks good. Now you can go all the way to the left and all the way to the right. This is actually making it darker or brighter. I tend not to mess with that too much. I will leave that at 0. And then same goes for the midtone, so this will change the whole kind of image, I think right about there. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. Blending or balance I use a lot. This will shift it more towards the shadows, and this will shift it more towards the highlights. So get the colors you want, and then you can come over here and adjust it. So this is going to make it cooler, more blue, because I have my shadows as like kind of that tealish blue. Or if I go all the way to the right with the higher balance, it's going to go more towards the highlights, which is that yellowish orange. So I personally think right around there is looking good. So we'll do another reference. Not too shabby. Moving down to the detail, this is a big one, sharpening. Now, you don't want to ever crank this all the way up because then you're going to induce a lot of noise. I try to go right around 75. That's a happy medium. This also depends on your exposure and the camera and lens setup. Masking, what you can do is hold down Option or Alt, depending on if you're Mac or Windows, And the further you go, you'll notice that less and less is white and there's an outline. That means it's applying that sharpening only to those regions, so that way the whole image doesn't look kind of crazy and over the top. Noise reduction, this is if you took an image that was severely underexposed and there's a lot of grain, you can adjust this slider and it will remove that, but it also kind of softens the image as you do that. Something you always want to do is turn this on as remove chromatic aberrations and add the enable profile corrections. This will sense which camera you're using and it will remove any lens distortion or vignetting. Always select those because that, as you can see, definitely brighten up the image. It removes some of the vignetting and now we have a brighter image. And then down here with the calibration, this is just again kind of more of a slider where you can make the shadows more on the green side or you can make it more on the magenta side. Red primaries, this is very similar to the Hsl tab, but this is just a broader overview of that. But yeah, guys, that is the basics. Again, this is kind of more for someone that's just getting into it. I hope that that helped you. If you guys enjoyed this, please feel free to drop a like. If this video does well, I will then do another video discussing the tools, and I'll go more in depth on some of the other features that Lightroom offers because their tools were just updated a few weeks ago. They have some extremely powerful tools now. So nonetheless, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if this did help you, and I will catch you guys in the next upload. Later, guys.